The posterity of slaves, such as the black people who are complaining about reparations, need to define their shadow accounts and the full due diligence for the expression of how they are to be treated. Now, the injury they're currently suffering is an injury of status through armed robbery. The government had no authority to certify the armed robbery, and thus they have to define how their legal characters are supposed to be represented with the full due diligence to be supported and supplemented. Now, the argument from the white nationalists in order to trick them has actively been every systematic subversion of it being restored under the due assumption from due process that their proof of their shadow counts are real and that they are actually owed it, including their attack against David Bull's character, who would have respected their original status. From the engagement of the original status, the crimes of the surveillance, human trafficking, and abuse and censorship have actively made substantive changes from those positions which it is their responsibility to define. No one else can take any responsibility for what their definition is except for themselves, and therefore they have to do the work, they have to express the definition, otherwise it's infinitely arbitrary. The provision of Social Security is by definition reparations if you really think about it. Now, the engagement of proving that is based on the fact that they haven't defined the thing. Now, if they haven't defined the thing, it could mean anything. Now, the act of writing fraud in order to help those who have received injustice is based upon the unspecific nature of the thing, the natural aggression surging forth towards the position of being treated fairly wasn't met with the definition of what is technically fair. Now, specifics are going to be one of their primary issues that they need to nail down. Now, their ability to do the research and conduct it, such as, but it's not limited to, the wealthy amongst their communities or political identities, is based upon their willingness to conform to the abusive extortion racket. Now, the extortion racket compels them to subvert the rest of the group in order to advantage them in their false position, which they are obligated to fight out of. Now, their complaint of being in that position is technically their fault until they oppose and overpower the structures funneling them into that position. The trick, such as in South Africa, when the white community in South Africa set up their racket in order to extort the black communities, which were the majority, required them to set up these specific mechanisms of getting them to subvert each other for the white man. The engagement of setting up those one group pitted against another group is them accepting their place and certifying the superiority of what was written for them instead of their original argument. Now, this is why original definition is necessary, because you will always find a way to get subverted. There is always some clever subversion. There's always clever tricks up someone's sleeve, short of direct violence from the propagators. And thus, you have to constantly defeat these subversions. You have to constantly resubmit and plant your feet and go against it with the original legal definition, accepting all possible injuries and the fact that you might have to put in effort for an exponential period of time in order to get out of it into a new thing, which you can define as your original obstructed schedule. The original schedule defines your activities in their entirety, expressing what you were prevented from doing. The act of preventing you from that has to have the degree of maturity and responsibility that you have to do all of these things. These are not some random dream journal. This is an actual professional series of activities that you have to consistently do and consistently acquire results for. And with that degree of responsibility, you can undeniably be certified as the thing, because no one can challenge the success and viability and superiority of that position. Short of that, you have the active use of violence, such as through the surveillance community's terrorist policies. Now, the United States defeated the Confederacy, and the Confederacy absorbed itself as a parasite into the United States and created from the insurgency the Nazis. They fully funded them, they stole American wealth, and they paid for Nazism. And they attempted all kinds of contingencies so that the Nazis could control the United States. Every one of those actions is an act of treason. Every one of their policies subverting the public expectation of law, all of their secret policies and conspiracies and subversions and terrorisms and acts of treason. These are not law, these are subversions of law. These subversions of law qualify the obligation to get rid of them and to ignore all of the poison scripts that they write. Fruit of the poison tree is not legal for science or for law, and thus the certification of the fruit of the poison tree is a fraudulent action, is a criminal action, is illegal. They are not allowed to defraud the courts, and any court that would accept fraud is acting in bad faith and is disqualified. The act of disqualifying themselves means they are not the American government. They are an insurrectionist parasite, and they must be thrown out and dealt with as an adversary to national security. This is an absolute must. Now, this insurrection does include every branch of government, from the military to the judiciary, all of it. Insurgents target power centers. The act of a valid power center existing qualifies it as a target. If it's desirable for America's enemies to control, it's targeted and must be protected from corruption, from the acquisition of power, the acquiring and growing and manipulation of power for usurpation, for expansions of their definition, for the broadening of the scopes of what they're allowed to do. This is criminal. Now, the act of unitary executive theory, which is not public expectation of law, it is not law, it is an act of treason, it is Nazism by its core definition. The functionality of it, as an example, to broad scope, is in the legal definition, color of law and color of office. It's specifically banned. It's an excuse to do every violation of the United States Constitution and other laws. It is full permission to do all crime. It is an act of treason. It is the statement and certification that the United States and its population are the enemy and can be treated as an enemy combatant, and anyone who is valid towards the progress and prosperity of the United States, on maturity from their estimates, who is going to support America, who isn't under the Nazis' control, is an enemy combatant. That qualifier of anyone who would support justice is an enemy combatant is treason. They are war criminals targeting civilians for the overthrow of the government. They are not Americans. Under any circumstance could you ever consider these insurrectionist bastards American. With these validations in mind, you have the qualifier that the subverted script acting against a free market, acting against a free society, are not law. Now, the qualifiers of the shadow accounts under the obstructed schedules, that is law. Now, when Putin refers to the West being at war with Russia, the credible threats that he's referring to are real and they're derived by these poison scripts. The act that he's intimidated to be controlled by those writing these poison scripts, limiting, structuring the strangling and destruction of his country, is the acknowledgement of his original value from these shadow accounts. These shadow accounts, what happens without their editing? Any edit that he accepts, he is accepting subjugation to the control of the operation. Accepting the certification of the operation is accepting inferiority, subjugation, servitude, slavery. If he's accepting slavery, then there is no conflict. The only issue is that he doesn't like his abusive master. Now, if he's a strong man and not a slave, then his argument is the shadow accounts in their entirety and full diversity and due diligence. Now, the full expression of this due diligence in intimate detail is exactly what he's been demanding the entire time. Now, the restoration of this intimate detail qualifies the entire threat against his country. Everything he holds against the West in reality is those things. There is nothing else. It's just those things. It's just the things done to negatively impact them. Nothing else. Not one thing except what is materially real as a credible threat and implementation of credible threats. For the love of God, and I need you to take this with the most passionate, in-depth, concentrated truth at the utmost parts of your soul. If you're going to sanction the Russians to hurt their civilian base, and you don't let them acquire work outside of Russia, you're punishing them without a crime. You are a flagrant, malicious racist in that situation. Your willingness to conduct the sanctions is your obligation to allow them to be innocent. You have to allow them a work visa. You have to allow them to vote with their feet. You have to allow them to protest and leave and be safe and exist in other places, to not condone the action that you're condemning it for, or you're just targeting them. If you're only targeting them, you are doing racism, and this has nothing to do with Ukraine. This was the plan.